I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in a story like this. When you get married, you don't picture betrayal or heartbreak in your future. You imagine anniversaries, shared laughter, maybe a couple of kids running around the house. I know I did. Sarah and I had that, or at least I thought we did. We met in the most unremarkable way possible, at a friend's barbecue on a summer evening. She was standing by the grill, laughing at some joke I hadn't caught, her auburn hair glowing in the fading sunlight. I remember thinking she looked like the kind of woman you'd see in a romantic movie, completely out of my league. But somehow we clicked. She teased me for burning my hot dog, I made a self-deprecating joke about my lack of grilling skills, and by the end of the night, we were sitting on the porch talking about everything from our favorite books to our childhood dreams. Fast forward 5 years, and we were married, living in a modest house in the suburbs. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. I worked as a graphic designer, freelancing from home, while Sarah managed marketing campaigns for a mid-sized firm downtown. We had a rhythm, a life that felt steady and secure. Looking back now, I realize the cracks were always there, small and almost invisible, like hairline fractures in a glass pane. But at the time, I didn't see them, or maybe I didn't want to. It started subtly. Sarah began staying late at work more often, claiming deadlines were piling up or that she had to meet with clients. I didn't think much of it at first. She'd always been ambitious, and her career meant a lot to her. "I'll make it up to you," she'd say, kissing me on the cheek as she grabbed her purse. And she usually did, at least, in the beginning. But then there were the missed calls and unanswered texts. She'd forget to tell me when she'd be late, or cancel plans at the last minute. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a busy season at work. "She's stressed," I'd think. "She'll come around once things settle down." One evening, though, something shifted. Sarah had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. It buzzed with a notification, and out of habit, I glanced at the screen. It was a text from someone named A. "Can't stop thinking about earlier. Same time tomorrow?" My stomach dropped. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. A could be anyone, a coworker, a friend. The message could mean anything. But the unease settled in, like a weight pressing down on my chest. When Sarah came back into the room, I asked casually, "Who's A?" Her reaction was instant, too instant. She froze for a fraction of a second before plastering on a smile. "Oh, that's Amanda. We're working on a project together." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she said it felt off. Her tone was too light, her smile too forced. From that moment on, the doubts began to creep in. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Sarah was always on her phone, her screen tilted away from me. She'd laugh at texts but wouldn't share the joke. When I asked about her day, her answers were vague, as if she didn't want to talk about it. And then there was the perfume. Sarah had always worn the same scent, a light, floral fragrance I loved. But suddenly, she started wearing something different, something heavier and more expensive. When I asked about it, she shrugged and said she wanted a change. Little things like that started to pile up, each one small on its own but together forming a picture I didn't want to see. I remember one night in particular. Sarah had gone out with some coworkers for drinks, at least, that's what she told me. She came home late, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly tousled. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but really, I was waiting for her. "Have fun?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she said, kicking off her heels. "It was nice to unwind." But something about her didn't seem right. Her voice was too breezy, her movements too deliberate, as if she were trying to act normal. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, I felt the first real pang of doubt. What if she wasn't just busy? What if there was something, or someone, else? I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust her. But the doubts wouldn't go away. They gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night. The turning point came a few days later. Sarah was in the shower, and her phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't just glance at the screen. I picked it up and unlocked it. The messages were there, plain as day. Dozens of texts from A. Each one more damning than the last. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. Wish I could hold you right now. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My hands shook as I put the phone back on the counter. When Sarah came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, I couldn't look at her. I mumbled something about needing fresh air and walked out the front door. As I stood on the porch, the cool night air hitting my face, I tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers. But another part of me was terrified of what she might say, of what it would mean for us. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't know the woman I'd married. After that night, everything changed. It was like a dam had broken inside me, flooding my mind with doubts, questions, and fears. I couldn't unsee the messages or shake the sinking feeling that my marriage was built on a foundation that had started to crumble. But I didn't confront Sarah immediately. I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear the truth. Maybe I was hoping there was some explanation that would make it all go away. Or maybe I just didn't know how to start the conversation. Instead, I became an observer in my own life, watching Sarah's every move, analyzing every word, every action, every expression. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a silent investigator piecing together a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The signs were there, as clear as day, now that I was paying attention. Sarah was always on edge, her phone practically glued to her hand. She started taking her calls outside or in the bedroom with the door closed, claiming it was work-related. One evening, I asked her how her day had been. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Busy, she said, her voice clipped. We've got this new client who's been a nightmare. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was it the new client that kept her late at work? Or was it, I couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty was eating me alive. So, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I started looking for proof. The next day, while Sarah was at work, I sat at my desk, staring at her laptop. She'd left it on the dining table, like she always did, trusting that I wouldn't touch it. And I never had, not until now. My hands trembled as I opened the lid. Her password was easy to guess, our wedding date. For a moment, I hesitated. This felt wrong, invasive. But then I thought about the texts, the late nights, the lies. I needed answers. Her email was clean, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I checked her social media messages, and that's where I found it. A string of conversations with Alex, the name behind the initial A. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just casual work-related chats. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. You looked amazing today. Can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? My stomach churned as I read the messages. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. Sarah was having an affair. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt sick, betrayed, and utterly helpless. That evening, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Every time she spoke, every time she smiled, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. How could she act so normal, so casual, when she was hiding something so devastating? I knew I needed to confront her, but I also knew she'd deny it if I didn't have concrete proof. So, I decided to gather more evidence. The next day, I called an old friend, Matt, who worked as a private investigator. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he didn't hesitate when I explained the situation. I'll look into it, he said. Give me a week. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine, while inside, I was falling apart. Sarah seemed oblivious, or maybe she was just good at hiding it. Finally, Matt called me. I've got something, he said. We met at a coffee shop, and he handed me a manila envelope. My hand shook as I opened it, revealing a stack of photos. The first one was of Sarah, sitting at a restaurant with a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, leaning in close, their body language intimate. The next photo was worse. It showed them walking out of the restaurant, his hand on her lower back, guiding her toward a car. The last photo was the most damning. It showed them entering a hotel together, his arm around her shoulders. I stared at the photos, my vision blurring as tears filled my eyes. There it was, the proof I'd been dreading, the confirmation of my worst fears. Matt looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "I'm sorry, man," he said. "I know this isn't what you wanted to find." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. That night, I waited for Sarah to come home. When she walked through the door, I was sitting at the dining table, the envelope in front of me. She froze when she saw me, her smile faltering. "Hey," she said cautiously. "What's going on?" I didn't say anything at first. I just slid the envelope across the table. Her face went pale as she opened it, her hands trembling. She looked at the photos, then at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice cold and steady, though inside, I was anything but calm. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she crumpled into the chair, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You didn't mean for what to happen?" I demanded. "To lie to me? To cheat on me? To destroy our marriage?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't like that," she said. "It just happened. I didn't plan it. I swear." Her excuses only fueled my anger. "You didn't plan it?" I snapped. "So what? You just accidentally fell into bed with him?" She flinched, her sobs growing louder. "I was lonely," she said. "You've been so distant lately, so caught up in your work. I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel wanted." Her words stung, but they didn't excuse what she'd done. "And instead of talking to me, you ran to him?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "I'm sorry," she said again, but the words felt hollow. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, shattered like a mirror into 1,000 jagged pieces. I sat in silence long after Sarah had retreated to the bedroom, her sobs echoing faintly through the walls. My hands rested on the table, fingers brushing against the edges of the damning photographs. The evidence was there, cold, undeniable proof of her betrayal. Yet, it felt unreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. When I finally mustered the strength to stand, I wandered into the kitchen and poured myself a drink, whiskey, neat. The burn in my throat was a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. My mind was a storm of questions, none of which I had answers for. How long had this been going on? Was it just him? Did she ever love me, or had our entire marriage been a lie? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television as infomercials droned on in the background. By morning, my anger had simmered into something colder, resolve. When Sarah emerged from the bedroom, her eyes were puffy and red. She looked at me cautiously, as if testing the waters. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I gestured to the chair across from me, and she sat down, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady but devoid of emotion. She flinched at the question, as though she'd been expecting it but still wasn't prepared to answer. "A few months," she admitted. "It started last summer." Last summer. I tried to think back to what had been happening then. I remembered the barbecues with friends, the weekends spent fixing up the backyard, the nights she'd come home late, claiming she'd been at the office. "And it's just him? Alex?" I pressed. She nodded, though her hesitation didn't escape my notice. "Yes. Just him." I wanted to believe her, but trust had been obliterated. Her words felt as flimsy as paper, easily torn apart by the weight of what I already knew. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it, raw and vulnerable. Why him? Why now? Sarah's gaze dropped to the table. I don't know, she said, her voice cracking. I wasn't happy. We weren't happy. You were always working, always stressed. I felt invisible. Invisible. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Had I really been that blind? Had I been so wrapped up in my own world that I'd failed to see hers crumbling? But then the anger surged back, hot and unrelenting. So, instead of talking to me, you decided to screw someone else? I snapped. That's how you fix things? Her tears started again, but they didn't move me. I was too consumed by my own pain to feel sympathy. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, the same tired excuse she'd given me the night before. It felt good to have someone notice me again. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Notice you? I repeated, my voice rising. Do you think I don't notice you? I've spent years building a life for us, trying to make you happy, and this is how you repay me? She didn't respond, just sat there, her shoulders shaking as she cried. I couldn't be in the same room with her anymore. Grabbing my keys, I left the house and drove aimlessly through the neighborhood, the streets blurring together as my mind raced. Eventually, I ended up at a park, the same one where Sarah and I had picnicked on our first anniversary. The memories came flooding back, her laughter as I chased her across the grass, the way her eyes lit up when I surprised her with a bottle of her favorite wine. How had we gone from that to this? I stayed at the park for hours, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. When I finally returned home, Sarah was gone. A note on the counter said she'd gone to stay with her sister for a few days to give me space. The house felt eerily quiet without her. It gave me too much time to think, to replay every moment of our marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. I started questioning everything, myself, her, us. In the days that followed, I avoided her calls and texts. I needed time to process, to figure out what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to believe that we could somehow repair the damage. But another part of me, the louder, angrier part, knew I could never look at her the same way again. The private investigator, Matt, called to check in. You okay? He asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Not really, I admitted. But I'll survive. If you need anything, let me know, he said. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and resentment. Gratitude for his help, resentment for the truth he'd uncovered. Eventually, Sarah came back. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. We sat down at the dining table again, the same place where our lives had come undone. I want to fix this, she said, her voice trembling. I know I screwed up, but I love you. I don't want to lose us. Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. They felt hollow, like an apology given out of obligation rather than genuine remorse. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just, please don't give up on us. Her desperation was palpable, but I couldn't make any promises. I was too broken, too hurt. I need time, I said finally. She agreed, though I could see the fear in her eyes. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself, but the pain was always there, lingering just beneath the surface. Sarah and I barely spoke, our conversations limited to the bare essentials. The distance between us felt insurmountable, a chasm too wide to bridge. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I had a decision to make. I could either try to rebuild what we'd lost or walk away and start over. But no matter which path I chose, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. The silence in the house had a weight of its own. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of us. The absence of trust, warmth, and everything we built over the years. Sarah moved quietly, her footsteps careful, her voice soft when she spoke, as if she feared that one wrong move might shatter whatever fragile truce we were clinging to. But I wasn't clinging to anything. I was just surviving. At first, I tried to convince myself that I could forgive her, that time would dull the sharp edges of her betrayal. I told myself that love was enough to weather this storm, that therapy would somehow help me find the strength to move past it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man I was before her affair was gone. I had changed. The therapy sessions became a routine, but they felt more like an obligation than a solution. Sarah spoke with raw vulnerability, recounting her feelings of loneliness and neglect, the cracks in our marriage that had led her to make a terrible mistake. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said during one session, tears streaming down her face. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, not because they were true, but because they made me question myself. Had I been so consumed by work, by the grind of daily life, that I'd neglected her? Was I partly to blame for what she'd done? But then I remembered the texts, the late nights, the lies. She'd made a choice, and no amount of self-reflection on my part could change that. When Dr. Keller asked how I felt about Sarah's confession, I didn't hold back. "I feel like it's an excuse," I said bluntly. "She's trying to justify something that has no justification. She could have talked to me, told me how she was feeling. But instead, she chose to betray me." Sarah flinched, her face crumpling, but I didn't care. Let her feel the pain, she'd earned it. At home, things were no better. Sarah tried to prove her commitment in 1,000 small ways, leaving me handwritten notes, cooking my favorite meals, suggesting date nights. But every gesture felt hollow, a desperate attempt to rewrite a story that was already written in ink. One night, she suggested we go out for dinner, something we hadn't done in months. I agreed, if only to get out of the house and break the monotony. The restaurant was one we used to frequent during happier times, and walking in felt like stepping into a time capsule. The smell of garlic and fresh bread brought back memories of anniversaries and celebrations, moments that now felt tainted. Sarah looked beautiful, her makeup understated, her hair styled in loose waves. She smiled at me across the table, but her eyes were filled with uncertainty. "I'm glad we're doing this," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The conversation started awkwardly, a forced exchange of pleasantries about work and the weather. But as the wine flowed, Sarah became bolder, her words tinged with hope. "I know things have been hard," she said, reaching for my hand. "But I believe we can get through this. I believe in us." I stared at her hand, her wedding ring glinting under the dim light. "Do you really?" I asked, my voice low. "Yes," she said, her grip tightening. "I know I made a mistake, Adam, but I love you. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if I have to." I pulled my hand away, leaning back in my chair. "You can't erase what you did, Sarah. You can't undo it. No matter how hard you try, it'll always be there, between us." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But instead, she straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening. "I know you're angry," she said. "But I can't keep punishing myself forever. If you're never going to forgive me, just say so. Stop dragging this out." Her words caught me off guard. I didn't have an answer, because I didn't know if forgiveness was even possible. The weeks dragged on, and my resentment festered. I found myself obsessing over the details of her affair, replaying every moment I'd uncovered in my mind like a sick movie. I wondered if she missed him, if she thought about him when she looked at me. One night, I confronted her again. "Did you love him?" I asked, my voice sharp. Sarah froze, her fork hovering midair. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "Did you love him?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "Don't lie to me, Sarah," I snapped. Her eyes filled with tears, and she set her fork down. "I didn't love him," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't about love. It was a distraction, a way to feel something when I felt numb." Her words felt like a slap, and I pushed my chair back, standing abruptly. "I can't do this," I said, walking away from the table. By the time we reached our next therapy session, the cracks in our marriage had widened into chasms. Dr. Keller tried to guide us, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Sometimes," she said gently, "couples come to therapy not to fix their marriage, but to find closure. To learn how to part ways with understanding and respect." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sarah looked at me, her expression stricken, but I couldn't meet her gaze. The tension at home became unbearable. I started spending more nights at the office or going for long drives to avoid being near her. When I was home, I barely spoke, retreating into the bedroom or the garage. One night, Sarah confronted me. "Do you even want this marriage anymore?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. When I finally spoke, my words were like knives. "No. I don't." Her sobs echoed through the house as I walked away, leaving her to cry alone. The night Sarah asked me if I wanted this marriage anymore, I thought her tears might move me. Once they would have. But as I watched her sobbing in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she clutched the counter for support, all I felt was emptiness. No anger. No sadness. Just a cold, hollow void. She spent the night on the couch, her crying eventually fading into silence. I stayed in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had become so numb. The truth was, I had already made my decision. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Sarah moving around the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted through the house, and for a brief, disorienting moment, I thought everything was normal. But then I remembered. I found her sitting at the dining table, a mug in her hands, staring blankly out the window. She looked exhausted, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. "We need to talk," I said, my voice breaking the fragile stillness. She looked up, her expression guarded. "About what?" "You know about what," I said, sitting down across from her. She set the mug down, her hands clasped tightly together. "Adam, please. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away." "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "You did that the moment you chose him over us." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. "I can't keep pretending, Sarah. I can't keep waking up every day and looking at you, knowing what you did. It's killing me." Her voice cracked. "I thought we were trying. I thought we were working on this." "I was trying," I said bitterly. "But it's not working. It's never going to work." That night I started packing. I didn't tell her I was leaving, I didn't need to. The look on her face when she saw the suitcase was enough. "You're really doing this?" she said, her voice hollow. "Yes," I said, not meeting her eyes. She stood there for a moment, as if she didn't know whether to scream or cry. Finally, she walked away, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I spent the night on the couch, my suitcase by the door, waiting for morning to come. Leaving wasn't the clean break I thought it would be. Sarah called me constantly in the weeks that followed, her voice alternating between desperation and anger. Some days she begged me to come back, promising that things would be different. Other days she lashed out, accusing me of abandoning her, of being just as much at fault as she was. "You're a coward," she said during one particularly heated call. "You're running away because you can't face your own failures." Her words stung, but I didn't let her know. "Maybe I am," I said coldly. "But at least I'm not lying to myself anymore." After that, the calls stopped. I thought leaving Sarah would bring me peace, but it didn't. I moved into a dingy apartment on the other side of town, a far cry from the house we'd shared. The walls were thin, the neighbors loud, and the place smelled faintly of mildew no matter how much I cleaned. Most nights, I sat alone on the couch, a bottle of whiskey on the coffee table and the TV playing something I wasn't paying attention to. The silence was unbearable, but the noise of my thoughts was worse. I replayed every fight, every tear-filled conversation, every moment of her betrayal. I thought about the man she'd been with, imagining their time together in vivid, excruciating detail. It was like a wound I couldn't stop picking at, a pain I couldn't let go of. One night, I ran into Sarah's sister, Rachel, at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me, her expression shifting quickly from shock to pity. "Adam," she said cautiously. "How are you?" "Fine," I said, my tone clipped. She hesitated, then sighed. "Sarah's a mess, you know. She doesn't leave the house much anymore. She barely eats. I don't think she's handling this well." Her words should have made me feel something, guilt, maybe, or regret. But all I felt was anger. "She should have thought about that before she cheated," I said coldly. Rachel flinched, but she didn't argue. Instead, she just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Take care of yourself, Adam," she said before walking away. Months passed, but the bitterness didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, festering like an infection. I started drinking more, using the alcohol to numb the pain. It didn't work, not really, but it was better than feeling everything so acutely. Work suffered. My friendships suffered. I became withdrawn, snapping at anyone who tried to help. Even my parents stopped calling as often, their voices strained with worry during our rare conversations. "Maybe you should talk to someone," my mother suggested one day. "I'm fine," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. But I wasn't fine. I was drowning, and I didn't know how to save myself. The last time I saw Sarah was at the courthouse. We sat on opposite sides of the room, avoiding each other's eyes as the judge finalized our divorce. The whole process was quick, almost clinical, and when it was over, we walked out without saying a word. As I stepped into the cold afternoon air, I felt a strange sense of finality. Not relief, not closure, just an ending. Sarah didn't look back as she walked away, and neither did I. It's been over a year now, and the scars of our marriage still linger. I haven't dated anyone since the divorce. The thought of letting someone get that close again feels impossible. Sometimes, I wonder if Sarah feels the same. If she looks back on what we had and regrets it, or if she's moved on with someone else. I don't think I'll ever know. And maybe that's for the best. What I do know is this: betrayal changes you. It strips away your illusions, your trust, your hope. It leaves you raw and broken, with wounds that never fully heal. I used to believe in happy endings. Now I don't believe in endings at all, just a slow, painful unraveling of everything you thought you knew. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.